Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Eden Tesfay, a Prisma Cloud Solutions Architect for Palo Alto Networks. Eden, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. And this is the Cloud Exchange, but of course we're talking cyber, my favorite topic, and I know it's one you're really interested in as well. One thing we wanted to explore, more and more organizations, agencies are adopting cloud services, moving to the cloud. How is the security model evolving as these organizations migrate to the cloud in different ways?
Oh yeah, so the security model has changed dramatically. And so think of it in a sense where how we protected on-premise applications, right? Typically, it was perimeter-based protection. And we worried about, of course, insider threat, improper access within that perimeter boundary, but a lot of it was managed by that perimeter. That gave us the defense that we required and needed. Whereas when we go to the cloud, we operate in a boundaryless, fluid environment. One, our data is going to be leaving our on-premise network, right? It's going to be in the CSP. And two, we are looking at not only lifting and shifting applications, but we're also looking to modernize those applications. We're looking to really take advantage of the cloud the way that we should, the way that we can reap benefits, right? The scalability, the flexibility, the cost optimization capabilities that the cloud provides us. And so what happens is that our boundary that we set and the security controls that we have for on-premise, it doesn't translate very well to the cloud. And the cloud security operations model is really defined by the shared responsibility model that is defined by the cloud service providers, be it it's AWS or Azure or GCP. Right? They're all going to have the shared responsibility model that delineates what you're responsible for as a customer in the cloud versus what they're responsible for as a cloud provider. And it may seem very simple, however, this is also dynamic, just like the cloud. So depending on what service you use, whether it's a managed service or infrastructure as a service, the shared responsibility model changes. Your responsibilities change, right? So managed services, you have less responsibility. Unmanaged services, you have more. And if we take a look at how organizations and agencies are adopting the cloud, rarely do you see them going with just one cloud, right? They're always going multi-cloud, AWS, Azure. And so once they have defined their migration strategy, security tends to be kind of like an afterthought. It's not built into the foundation of their migration strategy. So that complicates that security operations model that you just asked about, right? So the security operation model for the cloud requires us to be a lot more intentional. It requires us to understand how we scale our security operations alongside our cloud and our cloud operations. And it allows us to rethink and redesign the processes that we have for on-premise to fit the dynamic nature of the cloud.
Got it. And you just described it at a high level, but say I'm an agency, I want to move this important application to a cloud environment. Where do I start? What's the strategy for kind of managing the security risks during that migration so I'm not treating it as an afterthought, but I'm doing it in a way that treats security as an important factor?
Absolutely. So for agencies, when the overall migration strategy is going to be defined at a higher level, right? We're going to take a look at our processes. We're going to retrain our people. We're going to reconsider and look at, what are the risks that we're facing? What tools are we using? How do they optimize and help our processes? How does that translate to the cloud? But in your specific question, you have an application. You've determined that it's a good candidate for cloud migration. Are you going to refactor it? Meaning, are you going to re-architect the way that application is run? Are you going to re-platform? Well, are you going to host it differently in the cloud? Or are you going to lift and shift? Meaning that you just take that application as is and you put it in the cloud, right? You offload the infrastructure responsibility that you have. So that's the first thing that you do. In doing that, the planning phase, we have to really assess what security capabilities you're going to require, depending on what stage that application is in on the cloud migration journey. right? And here is where the important piece comes. Even in the planning stage, more often than not, what I see organizations do, and what I see them regret, is the fact that they do and they don't consider security. So they do, meaning they take the least path resistance. So cloud native solutions are great, but they are cloud native and they are point solutions. If you look at a lot of these solutions, they give you the insight that you need, but it's not in a consolidated form. And the more capabilities you require, the more services that you have to turn on, the more you have to manage. Right? So again, thinking about scalability, here at the planning stage of any migration journey is where we should think about foundational security capabilities as well as scaling and architecting for the future. And when I say that, what are the security capabilities that your application needs now? So if it's in the lift and shift stage, yes, you may need compliance, visibility, and governance, but most importantly, what kind of security capabilities is your application going to need come 3 years or 5 years from now? Right? So, because if you're lifting and shifting this application, right, the end goal should be to refactor it. The end goal should be to have this application running in the most optimized manner, leveraging native cloud capabilities. So if that's the case, then the asks that you have now are possibly not going to be the same again 5 years from now. So how do you manage that? Here's where we need to start thinking about security again from the onset. Right? As you know, security is at job zero, right? So we have to start considering it and understanding, how is security going to fit into each stage of the migration process. So that's planning. Now, we need compliance, we need governance, and we need visibility into the services that we're going to enable and how they map to the compliance frameworks that we have to abide by. Right? And we need to also govern these services. These services often operate in a disjoint manner. There's a lot of interconnectivity, but they're also very independent, which is great because it gives us scalability, it gives us flexibility. But we also have to think about, well, how do we have a consolidated end-to-end view across these relationships and these services? Right? So from the planning phase, we consider security. And that is the first thing. And then the next thing is, assessing and identifying the risks, right? So if you have, a web application and it's going to be open to the internet, things that you need to think about is, the common threat vectors, right? How am I going to protect my application? If it's lift and shift and it's a web-based application, then are we going to do a firewall in front of that application? Are we going to enable some security capability? Are we going to expose that application via API? If that's the case, we need API security. Again, considering all of the different risks and aligning the capabilities of the security capabilities that we need to those said risks. Right? And then once you are in the migration phase is continuous visibility governance. That's a strict requirement. And in any cloud that you're operating in, right, is we need to be able to govern as these services are often very ephemeral. They come up and they come down very fast. It's hard to audit them, again, because they operate in connected but non-connected manner, right? How do you truly understand, what, how, and when things happened and why they happened? And so here, especially during the migrations phase, is where we want to really understand, and manage our shadow IT, right? Be able to see all of the different services being spun up, be able to answer the what and the why. And then post-migration, for every application, again, continuous visibility and governance and assessment. And this is not something that organizations can take on with cloud-native solutions. This is not something that teams are outnumbered security practitioners, as security practitioners are often outnumbered by developers and the teams they support. They can't manage this. And if we're going to the cloud to scale, then our processes and our operations have to scale to support that growth. And so for that reason, we need to take a platform approach to these security, visibility, governance capabilities that we require.
All right. Well, and I think you've just described kind of an ideal way to do cloud migration. But when you work with your customers or the folks that you talk to out in the field, what are some of the common security challenges that pop up during a cloud migration? How do you address them in kind of in a dynamic way?
Yeah. So the main concern for customers customers when they're going to the cloud is data security.
Yeah.
And we talked about that perimeter-based security, that fortress that we created, right, for our applications and our infrastructure on premise. It's difficult for organizations to realize that kind of confidence in the cloud because, well, their data is leaving that boundary. And so the first thing that, again, they're concerned about is data security. But what we run into, the typical security risks that we see that expose them to the data security risks are misconfigurations, right? That's the main, when you think about cloud services and how they're spun up, it's not very easy to standardize, right? Because every application requires very unique needs. And if we go a layer deeper and we talk about, new ways of architecting applications and microservices, then we can say, every container has requirements, every functionality has requirements that are dynamic, that change. And so it's not unheard of course, to templatize and standardize through IAC. That's what we do often. But those IACs are also dynamic. They're also changing. So being able to understand, what the impact is of misconfiguration. A lot of customers that I worked with before just had a really hard time with the visibility and governance. So typically what happens is we start doing, right? I kind of mentioned that earlier. We start doing. So we go to the cloud and security becomes an afterthought. And well, we have security needs here and there. We might need, encryption. We might need key management, right? So some security needs that we need. We might need, a web application firewall. So what happens is we turn these services on. Now, we don't understand the implications of how we're architecting our security operations. We don't understand that because we're looking at it from one application perspective. And also typically in cloud migration, although it's a larger initiative, the visibility is siloed to, application owners and stakeholders that have a stake in that application being migrated or ran. So there is really no end-to-end visibility across cloud operations. And being as though it's multi-cloud, that complicates it. So the main things that I see as a hiccup for customers that I've worked with is, they incur too much technical debt to where to make any progress at all in their migration journey, they kind of have to try to go into a greenfield environment. They have to walk it back, right? The things that they've done in order to define a strong foundation so that they are able to grow and scale in the cloud. So misconfiguration, data security issues, governance across the cloud, right? Shadow IT, what services are out there that belong to me that I'm not aware of, and IAM risks. That's a huge one. IAM is identity and access management, and in the cloud, services have identities as much as users, and in those service roles, again, we talked about this. The cloud offering us, I like to call it Legoland, because you get to take pieces, that fit the application and or the building that you're building, right? And you get to piece that together. And, those pieces can, again, operate independently. When they come together, they give us the functionalities that we're looking for, right? So being able to understand, what role am I assigning a service? Because, well, a service, an EC2 instance, which is a compute instance in Amazon Web Services, it needs to assume a role, meaning it needs to put on a hat and get permissions so it can access an S3 bucket, which is a data store for AWS, right? So it needs to be able to access that. And, well, if I have an application, if you think about it in an expanded manner, if I have an application and I have a lot of things that need to access this service and that need to work with that service and that, how do I employ zero trust? How do I implement least privilege? That is, cumbersome because it's difficult to know exactly, the minimal permissions that service needs to operate. So what do? Well, we used managed roles, right, and managed policies from these cloud service providers, which Unit 42, it's a threat research and intelligence team at Palo Alto Networks, they found that 99% of cloud identities are overly permissive, meaning that there are permissions there that are dormant that should a threat actor, assume the right role, then they can escalate privileges and they can make lateral movements across our cloud environment. So these are the risks that organizations and agencies have to be aware of when thinking about a cloud migration and getting started, depending, even if you are in the middle of a cloud migration journey, even if you have cloud presence, and there's always a need for defining, a unified security approach to your responsibilities in the cloud.
Got it. Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned a good word for our federal audience, zero trust. Yeah. That's something that everyone is moving toward. There's a big deadline actually in just a few months for agencies to really adopt at some level a zero trust architecture, and cloud plays a big role in that. And that kind of brings in this idea of compliance, complying with the zero trust memo, complying with FISMA. I mean, the compliance is very important to the federal folks here. So how does that play a role in the principles that you just laid out for a cloud migration? What measures can be taken to ensure compliance with security?
Absolutely. So compliance is actually a huge hindrance to cloud migration, right? So organizations, agencies get started on this migration journey, and they are, brought to a halt because they don't really have a good process to compliance in the cloud. Think about this. You're running an application in Azure. You may run that same application or a different application in AWS. You think about, the different compensating controls that are required by those frameworks, right? Just simple ones, we can use MFA, multi-factor authentication, or we can use, data security, meaning data is encrypted at rest. Now, thinking about all of the different places that your data lives, whether it's in RDS, whether it's in S3, right? Thinking about how dynamic those services are and how often they change. Thinking about the parameters that you're responsible for, meaning the responsibilities that you have within securing those resources. Now, let's 10x that, and let's do it multi-cloud. So manually managing your compliance or leveraging point solutions. When I say point solutions, I'm talking of the solutions that are really purpose-built to fit the cloud they're servicing, right, or the unique service or capability they're servicing. So thinking about that and thinking about just the complexity of compliance in the cloud, we have to take a platform approach. Again, I come back to that, right? And just in demystifying that just a little bit more. If you think of the cloud, there is the service layer. That's going to be all the services that we enable, right, to help power our application. There's a compute layer. That is actually my application running, right? That's going to be the services that are helping my applications run the hosts, the containers, serverless, and then those applications running on that host. And then there's application layer. That's the recipe. That's where we cook the application. We define the recipe, we build it, and we send it off to the compute layer. So there are layers to this. So what I just described to you about securing your data and enabling MFA across those two clouds, right? There's also another layer. We're talking about the service layer here. The compute layer is also something that you're responsible for. And so securing your application, ensuring that there are no vulnerabilities on the hosts that you're running, on the operating systems that you've captured, right, or that you're running on those hosts. Ensuring that, security is introduced at the code and build stage rather than at the cloud security stage where you are, triaging issues that are going to propagate again. They're going to come back. So thinking about that, we need a zero trust approach, and these practices that have been defined, that are tried and tested, we need to take a platform approach in order to enable that. So if you're looking for a security platform to manage your compliance need in the cloud, not only should you be thinking about, well, okay, I need to achieve compliance across, all of this AWS account that I'm running in my application in, but you also need to think about the layers of that application. The more consolidation you have within the cloud, the better off you're going to be, because context matters, right? And then ensuring that the insight that you're getting according to, hey, you've kind of failed this compensating control for NIST 853, that you have guidance on how to fix it, One, it's near real time, but you also have guidance. Going back to those security practitioners being outnumbered, our developers are very innovative. They're very quick to try on new services and adopt new capabilities. So our security practitioners have to keep up with that. Well, how do we secure that? You like this new feature, you like this service, how do we secure that? How is it compliant to the regulations that we have to abide by? So thinking about that, we have to ensure that the frameworks that you're leveraging are supported by the platform, the security platforms that you may be looking at. And the security platform is built to introduce security and compliance at every stage of that migration journey. That's how you can really put in place and implement those practices and those theories of zero trust and ensure that you are compliant with the compliance frameworks that you are regulated by.
Okay, all right. And you obviously, we've talked about a lot of best practices today, but cybersecurity never stops evolving, IT never stops evolving. There are new risks, new threats, new trends. What are some emerging security trends or technologies that you think will shape cloud migration strategies, especially in the public sector, going forward?
Yeah, so I would say, one, I think you could guess this one. AI, right? Artificial intelligence. I think that's going to be a huge play for us. And in artificial intelligence, the way that it's going to shape our migration journey is that, one, our security practitioners are going to have enablement around the different cloud services, around guidance, around best practices, right, depending on how they leverage artificial intelligence. We're going to see a lot of organizations, a lot of agencies leveraging artificial intelligence internally, whether it is, I'm allowing my employees to access ChatGPT to ask, certain questions, or I am gathering data for training my models and implementing this new application. So in doing that, I think that AI is going to help our agencies and our organizations, one, understand best ways to optimize their workload, refactor applications much faster, and in that same way that AI is going to help us, I think that it's going to introduce new security risks. I think the same way that we used AI for good, that our threat actors are going to use AI for bad, right? They're going to be able to reverse engineer and understand, how to exploit different applications. They're going to be able to be fast in finding different threat vectors within our environment. So AI is going to definitely play a huge role in how cloud adoption looks in the coming years. The next thing that I do believe is that we're really going to get into DevSecOps. I think that it's going to be a practice that's not evangelized widely, but adopted widely by organizations. And the reason for that is I think that organizations and agencies are starting to understand, how not how big AI is, but how big the risk of artificial intelligence is. In doing that, if you think about artificial intelligence, and I always take it back to, how does it work? Like, let's break it down. And so if we think about it, well, artificial intelligence is a smart application. It's an application that does, smart things that's not programmed to do. Essentially, it learns from the data that we train it on or the different algorithms that we give it, and it can precisely, do something for us, whatever that application is intended to do. But it does it in a smart way. But it starts with two recipes. We have the data, a lot of data, right? We have the mathematical models, those algorithms that are going to train and learn from that data. And we have the application. So if you're looking at it from those building blocks, then secure the code is very important, right? Securing the data is important. And ensuring that we're able to have end-to-end visibility into our application. Our AI application is important, and that is DevSecOps. DevSecOps is ensuring that, again, security is job zero, that it is a shared responsibility amongst all stakeholders, right? And if we look at, AI in general, from building our own AI applications, then DevSecOps is going to enable the security capabilities that we need to augment the risk. And of course, you're going to see, organizations like Palo Alto Networks leverage AI for different use cases. Right? So you're going to see, and maybe you saw our recent news release, but you see that there are different ways that we're protecting AI. So there, users interacting with artificial intelligence applications like your chatbots. How are they interacting with it? What kind of data are they feeding it? Right? Should that be implicitly allowed? And then for the DevSecOps, or building our own internal machine learning models, our own internal AI applications, you have the full capabilities of the Cloud Native Application Protection Platform that's purposely built to protect AI applications. So that's in a nutshell. That's what I say.
Yeah, demystifying AI a little bit, and yeah, it's smart software, smart applications, as you said, and I think there's a lot of conversation around trust and security, and so that's kind of how you get there, is by at least using a DevSecOps approach. All right.
Exactly.
All right, and so moving forward, organizations are going to want to not just secure, but really optimize their cloud operations as they get deeper into the cloud. What are some ways that you can do that while still adopting that kind of security-first migration strategy that we've been talking about through this entire conversation?
Yeah, so if it's one thing that I'd like the audience to walk away with, it is always architect for the future.
Okay.
And ensuring that, a lot of times I come across these use cases and you may need something like secret scanning today, or, you may need SAST, or static application security testing capabilities, right? And in looking for those capabilities, it is beneficial to you all to consider a platform approach and ensuring, well, what are the capabilities that I need from an end-to-end perspective? If I have applications that are, majority of them are in the lift and shift stage, what do I foresee for those applications 2-3 years from now? And what security capabilities am I going to need? What this is going to do is it's going to allow our organizations and agencies to build their processes across a platform that has the capabilities that they need to optimize those processes. Processes are only as good as our people and our tools, right? So in defining those processes and being agile and ensuring that we're taking a preventative approach rather than a reactive approach, being able to respond to threat indications and threat security risks before those threat actors explore our environments. It takes them 15 minutes to do, right? We need to be able to give ourselves a strong foundation in building those processes. And so the cloud service providers echo this sentiment, take a platform approach to your shared responsibility model in the cloud. And as you continue to grow and scale in the cloud and re-architect, refactor applications and truly leverage the scalability and flexibility of the cloud, your security capabilities are also as flexible, fluid, and scalable to fit those needs.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to thank today's guest, Eden Tesfay, a Prisma Cloud Solutions Architect for Palo Alto Networks. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'm your reporter, Justin Doubleday. You're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.